Okay, all you awesome real estate agents out there. Today's exciting topic, of course, is agency. Wow, very exciting, right? So I want to ask you a question. This came up in one of our mastermind sessions today. And I want you to try and answer these questions for me and see if you can guess them correctly. Let's say you showed a buyer a house and you had them sign the mandatory agency disclosure form, and you've checked off that they're a buyer agent, and there's no exclusive buyer agency contract signed at all. Hasn't been signed. Now, you go out and you list the property for sale. You sign an exclusive right to sell agreement with the seller of the property, and you sign the mandatory agency disclosure form with the seller of the property. And then you realize this property would be a really good fit for my buyers. So now you want to go and tell the buyer about this property. So my question to you is, what agency relationship are you in now that you're with to introduce the buyer to your listing? Can you switch agency relationship? Now, you've had, in other words, it came up in our session. Perhaps you can tell the buyer that you're going to switch agency and become a seller's agent just for this one particular property. Can you do that? Are you a dual agent? Can you be a facilitator? How does all this work, right? The catch is, I think a lot of people get caught up in the trap of thinking, well, I don't have an exclusive buyer agency contract signed. And the answer is, you can have a buyer agency relationship with a buyer if you don't have an exclusive buyer agency contract signed. So now I've given you the answer. You are a dual agent in that situation if you want to introduce that buyer. Now, if your company prefers to not practice dual agency, you can refer the buyer or the seller to another person in your office, and you can be the designated buyer agent or the designated listing agent in that situation, and the buyer can buy that property. Otherwise, you need to disclose to both buyers and sellers that you're about to get into a dual agency situation. You should have them sign a form consenting that it's going to be okay, and putting them on notice, and then attaching it to the offer that you are a dual agent and you're getting permission from both parties to act as an agent on behalf of both the buyer and the seller. Oftentimes we try to avoid that because some people think it's a conflict of interest, including the buyer or the seller, and a lot of agents believe that too. So if you're not comfortable being a dual agent, again, you can refer one of those people out to another agent in your office, or maybe even another office in another company. Another question came up was, so you can't switch back and forth. You can't be a buyer agent one day and then a seller's agent another day. Once you've established that relationship, you're stuck with it. Now, another question came up was, how long does a buyer agency relationship last? And well, when does it end? And it really doesn't end once you get into that relationship. And that's why some people, when they meet a buyer for the first time, they'll choose to be a facilitator, because the agent hasn't decided whether or not they want to have an exclusive buyer agency relationship with that buyer yet or not. So think about that. Next time you show a property, maybe you don't want to be a exclusive buyer agent for that buyer. Maybe you want to be a facilitator for that one property. And then after you get to know each other and you present to each other, then maybe you can decide to work with them as a buyer agent if you want to. The agency relationship, it can end if the buyer cancels it. Let's say the buyer sends you a letter or an email or a text and says, I'm firing you as my buyer agent. I don't want to have this buyer agency relationship anymore. But even after it ends, you still have the duty of confidentiality and the duty to account for funds with them. That never ends. Even after you've sold them a property, those duties never end, okay? Let's say you have an exclusive buyer agency contract signed with the buyer, and the buyer agency contract expires, are you now no longer, do you no longer have an agency relationship with a buyer? You still do. Even after it expires, you still have to hold all the information confidential. All that information has to be confidential with that buyer. So again, buyer agency is not exclusive to just one property. You can't switch back and forth from being a buyer agent and a seller's agent just because it's convenient for you. And that's about it. So it's an interesting topic. A lot of agents and even broker owners of companies, they struggle with this information. There are times that I kind of question things myself, and I'll call the Massachusetts legal hotline just for some clarification. And they've been very helpful, extremely helpful. So when in doubt, never, ever assume. You know what they say about things when you assume. Always question, always ask. If you ever want to ask me a question, please do. Feel free, reach out to me. My number is 508-523-8033. You can call or text that number. You can email me, John, JOHN at c21metrowest.com. That's my email address. And I'm happy to help you with any questions you might have in regard to agency. Stay out of trouble out there, folks. Stay safe. And I don't mean just COVID. I mean agency. All right. I love you all. Take care and have a great day.